I've been working on another initiative. I'm calling it a project right now, and it will involve another podcast that we'll be starting. So we're gonna have to get you on
Okay.
that other conversation to take more of an
All right.
entrepreneurial perspective now that you have come to this entrepreneurial journey with brand thinking. I want to pause on that idea. Brand
Yeah.
think, specifically the
Hmm.
think aspect of this.
Yes.
What's the thinking behind the thinking to get the name brand think? I know it's
The
super meta.
thinking behind the thinking. Well, you know, I followed in your footsteps and wrote a book with my friend Liz High called "Think Like a Brand, Not a Bank," and that book taught me a lot about the power of mindset. And then my second book is A Year of Thinking Differently, which is 52 different mindsets you can adopt. There's no one mindset. And just, over these past 2 years, what I've recognized, especially as a CMO and as a marketer, is our most powerful asset is our mindset, is our minds as knowledge workers, and protecting that asset is so important. So when I thought about how to start a new company, I was like, it's really brand think. It's having that brand first mindset in everything you do, but also being very thoughtful and intentional in how you choose to do it. So that was it. But I took the I out so that all the kids are doing that. So it's THNK. But yeah, it's been good. It's been good so far, and the domain was available, so I went for it.
Well, I appreciate that thinking behind the thinking on brand think. I mean, I often ask people, have you ever heard of the word metacognition? They're like, no, what is that? I was like, it's
Ah,
basically metacognition is just thinking about your thinking.
thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
right.
you bring up this point about, knowledge work, being in the knowledge economy. That's actually some new thinking that I've had since you and I have last connected, that
Mm,
I am hypothesizing, and this is now writing the third book. I'm
wow.
hypothesizing that the knowledge economy is all but dead. Knowledge work,
Mm,
for that matter, is all but dead. And what I mean by that is we have moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy to a knowledge economy. But now, with the rise of AI and large language models, I hypothesize that knowledge, quote unquote, is becoming commoditized.
mm,
What is going to now come in is going to be what I'm framing as the wisdom economy. And wisdom is not just what you know, wisdom is also based upon experience as well.
hmm
It's what you've
hmm
lived, it's what you've seen, and being able to connect different points and different dots. Because, like, the conversation that we're having right now, that's a wisdom driven perspective. This
Right.
conversation does not exist in a large language model yet.
Yes. Right.
It's your perspective, it's my perspective, and it's all being formed here from our experiences. What's your take on this about,
Right.
how knowledge is transforming over time, and how knowledge could even be commoditized to where really the next ascension is going to be wisdom, which is based upon experience. So your experience is essentially your own IP, it's your intellectual property.
Mm. Wow. I yeah, that's a tough one. I think knowledge of things definitely is being commoditized, is being mobilized
Mm-hmm.
with AI and some of the things you've mentioned. I think knowledge of self, and what I specifically mean is discernment.
Mm.
Um, I think is I'm not going to say always will be, because they'll be playing this podcast, 100 years from now, and they'll point me as being wrong. But I feel like discernment is something we own, right? So what I'm finding in my client work now, which is really interesting, is man, people are just like trying to find their way back home almost, right? Just from a leadership perspective, from a um yeah, from an intuition, just how they see the world, how they operate at work. They're just sort of almost trying to get back home.
Hmm.
I'll give you a very specific example. I'm working with a CEO that is making a pivot to take a US based fintech globally. And look, the guy's done it three times before, right? I was sort of curious, like, well, what, what's different this time? Like, why do you need my help? And he was like, I've lost touch with the touch. He's like, he's like, I'm having trouble making decisions. I'm second guessing myself. I'm not relying on the wisdom that I have. There's so many other things now. And I don't want to, I don't want to mess up. And I was like, well, we've got to kind of peel that back, right? And get back to the leader that you are, right? Because to your pyramid point, he's got all this data now, he's got all these different, insights and knowledge, and it's actually working against him instead of for him, right? So it's like, how
Right.
do you harness that wisdom to work for you and move you forward faster as opposed to holding you back, right? You don't want it to be like the grandpa in the chair wisdom. You want it to be the actionable wisdom at pace. So I'm just hearing a lot of that, right? People just almost trying to get back to where they were before it all started.
Well, and I think that, particularly when we think about like leadership within financial services, getting back to where we were before, maybe it's getting back in touch with that intuition, because that post that you're
Mm,
mentioning on LinkedIn is you're making a recommendation to use both gut feeling and logic. And
right.
you say, start with your intuition, which idea feels best, then analyze rationally, look at the pros and cons. Although, when we think about a financial services leader, the logic piece might tend to overtake the intuition side. How do we reconcile?
Yes.
How do we balance these two modes of thinking when it comes to strategy, particularly with where we're at right now, looking out towards 2025 and beyond,
Hmm.
having a balance between intuition, logic, between feeling an emotion, and then being very practical with something that we can take action on?
Sure. I think it's that kind of classic where you start is going to be the closest to where you end. And
Mm,
so the order of what you just kind of read through is really, really important. Starting with intuition and then backfilling with logic, as opposed to let's start with the logic and then let me wrestle, right? That's what the CEO is wrestling with. He was starting with logic and then wrestling and trying to reconcile that with his gut feelings, right? What starts second is second for a reason.
right.
So, starting with intuition, starting with your wisdom, and then supporting or refuting that with data, as opposed to as an industry, we typically start with the logic, and then one or two brave people may raise their hand and bring some wisdom or some intuition to the table. So, as simple as it sounds, the order of operations is extremely important in order for us to get back in touch with the leaders and the strategists that we all are.
So you were talking about one or two people having the courage to raise their hand.
Mhm.
And something else that you have recently shared that caught my attention, which this was a new learning for me, the Shirky principle.
Oh, right,
Well,
right.
and I was
Yep.
like,
Yep.
I had to go and look this up and went down a, what is the Shirky principle here for those? Because I think about the one or two people that have the courage to raise their hand, to really think from
Mhm.
an emotive place, from an intuition place, because you said that institutions will try to preserve the problem to which they are the solution.